This webinar is on how technology can actually help you have a more human experience. Without further ado, let me turn it over to Marcus and Michael, and thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. All right, why don't we go ahead and jump right in. So I want to provide maybe a little bit of context for the title of this session about technology creating a more human experience at work. It's almost counterintuitive, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason that I thought this was an appropriate topic is I travel a ton, I know you do too, yep. All across the country and the planet talking to folks about the workplace. And I'm hearing more and more apprehension, especially from CHROs, about the idea that we are driving the humanity out of human resources. The fact is we're using more technology, we're pushing more self-service out, we're automating more and more. And so I'd like to present a bit of a counterintuitive idea that actually I think technology can be a helpful thing. And so in terms of the topics, use of a little alliteration today of yep. what we're going to be covering. We're going to talk about automation, aggregation, analysis, and then how we can use all of this in an advisory capacity. Ready Perfect. To jump in?
I'm ready. Let's go.
All right. So I actually love to start with what's happening in the media and what people are talking about. And so the Wall Street Journal had a great article back in May. And it was actually about Amazon. And so this author talked about the idea that Amazon is essentially automating the collection of performance data relative to their people to the degree that he's worried that this dystopian future that we'll all experience will result in software firing people with no human intervention. So again, I thought it was an appropriate way to start this conversation, especially about Amazon. I think we're all probably getting brown boxes on our doorsteps this time of year as well. So, you know, this is something that people are legitimately concerned about, is how do we ensure that we're delicately balancing the use of data as well as what I would call discretion in decision making. Thoughts on that, Michael?
Absolutely. When we talk about this, there's the fear, right, that technology is going to automate me out of a job. So much so that after doing some research, I found a great site, which is www.willrobotstakemyjob.com. And it's more of a fun site. It's not backed in data and science in particular, but it's a great site to go look at. And I can tell you on there, right, the ERP world, the people that touch our products are dramatically affected. Compensation managers, number one job that will be affected by technology. I didn't say replaced, I said affected. And then accountants, 94% chance that your jobs will be significantly affected by technology automation. So if you're not paying attention to it, now's the time, right? When I led teams, I used to tell people, you want to be the automators, not the automated. So you need to be aware of the transformation that's happening with the digital workforce and how we integrate that and how we better enable the humans to leverage the technology. It's not really a replacement. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. Everyone assumes that we're going to be replaced by technology, and I think the reality is technology has always created more jobs than it's destroyed, but those jobs are new and they're different.
Very different.
And so technology is, to your point, going to augment what we do, and in some cases change it dramatically. So for our approach from an Infor and RPI kind of combined perspective, from a philosophical perspective, we truly believe that human potential can only be realized by optimizing how people and technology interact. And I think that's true in just about every industry that there is. And so when you look at this balanced strategy that we want to create, it starts with automation, right? And I don't know if you've got some initial thoughts on how the automation has the potential to have an impact in the workplace.
Yeah, and one of the stories that I always share, right, is automation enters and transforms, and you can think of automation in a lot of different ways, right? The buzzword is RPA, but think of digitization, right? Think of analytics, that there's a lot of automation going on there. There's a lot around cloud, there's a lot around mobile, right? Pick a current buzzword that's automating or changing the way that we work. And what we do with that capacity that's created from automation, that becomes the transformational pivot point, right? How you as a CHRO or how you as a leader manage that capacity, right? And embrace it and understand it versus being fearful and negative towards it.
Right, right. So in terms of automation, we've got a poll question here. We're not going to actually have responses collected or aggregated, but just want to get you thinking about your organization and how much of your HR function today is automated. Is it very little? Is it, toward the 50 percentile? Usually when I ask this question, when I talk to folks, it's usually around that 25 to 50th percentile that people have started to automate. And so when you think about the prioritization of the HR function and the different disciplines of HR, I wanted to kind of create this visual representation of, okay, first of all, you've got on the left-hand side the nature of the work. Is it administrative and transactional in nature? Does it require some critical thinking? And does it require significant expertise at the very top? And then the other axis is around the impact to the business, the value that's driven.
Right.
Is it low, medium, or high? And so if you think about the different functions of HR and what we do with our daily lives, of course, there's a lot of data entry, right? There's a lot of tracking of employees and information. There's payroll, right? That's a critical element.
Absolutely. Every 2 weeks.
Yep, that's right. So having said that, do these things add a ton of value to the business? They're on the lower hand side, but they're also fairly administrative in nature, right? They do not require a ton of critical thinking. You start getting into the compliance side, maybe a little bit more impact if you're mitigating risk. And then you get into things like benefits and compensation. Now, these do require a little bit more. Now, you just mentioned the compensation managers may be a little bit concerned about their future on that website.
Absolutely.
But it does require some critical thinking, especially on the incentive compensation side and aligning behaviors with the comp piece. And then you get into things like employee relations, right? Which are, those are some of the things that we'll probably never see completely automated because you want to have a human conversation with another human when you've got things like sexual harassment and things that require some sensitivity, tact, and
Not good
diplomacy.
for a robot to handle.
I would tend to agree.
Yes.
So then you get into the performance management side, right? Where again, that's having a larger impact on business outcomes, does require some critical thinking. Recruiting is such a huge portion of our time and energy right now in the HR function because of the nature of the unemployment level being as low as it is. You've got training and development, you've got coaching, you've got planning for the future, and then we finally get to the top right-hand quadrant, which is around how can we be more prescriptive and consultative. And so the idea behind, just kind of mapping all of this out is to share that at some point we want to be able to automate and even outsource some of these core elements on the left-hand side, eventually allow more and more self-service technology to give people access to information so they can do things on their own. And then you mentioned RPA, which is robotic process automation or artificial intelligence. How do we create an environment using technology where we're able to take the majority of those things that the discipline of HR has been responsible for and have some of these other technologies and capabilities done for us so that we can focus in that top right quadrant? What are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you look at the lower, kind of that lower quadrant, right, that's HR of the past, right? That's the forms, and their job was really just to get you in the door, get you into a job, right? I think back to like the factories and such, right? It was onboarding. It wasn't of real value other than getting the employee in. When you look at today's employee, they're more complex, their lives are more diverse. What do they really care about, right? They don't care about the application, they don't care other than it's accessible, but they really care about having somebody to be consultative with, right? They want HR to understand them, not understand them as an employee, but understand them as a person. So that evolution is much more pronounced in the HR space. And how do you give your HR employees that opportunity, right? You got to create that bandwidth because you can't keep hiring HR people. So you take the self-service, right? Millennials want self-service as an option. They want to be able to be self-sufficient and do things in the middle of the night as they're up till 3 a.m. drinking coffee and still working. So we've got to give them the self-service tools. And through doing that, right, we create capacity. So I'd say, depending where you are in this scatter diagram, you want to just be moving, right? You want to be moving from left to right. and have a strategy and a plan and a tool to let you do that. If you're still on paper, right, that's okay. A lot of people still are, but have a plan, right? Be thinking about, okay, how do I take advantage of this AI and RPA thing that Marcus and Michael are talking about? What is it, right? Reach out, dial a friend, call us. We're happy to chat with you about what it is and how it's being used in other people and help you come up with a plan. And it doesn't have to be now, right? Everybody says, oh, I don't have budget for that. That's okay too, right? But talk about it and understand it and talk to thought leaders so that you can begin to have a strategy at least. And strategy is free, right, for the most part. And focus on what your employees really care about, right? I think the GHR product finally gives us a really good tool to be able to interact with our employee base. It's very exciting.
Totally agree. So you mentioned, okay, you set the strategy, but what is it and how does it work and what's the tangible way that this actually comes to life? And so we want to give you at least some insight into how Infor and RPI are working together to figure out how do we bring something to the market that people can leverage. And so first of all, you need access to the data, right? So we've got this data lake where we can create those data sets, create algorithms, train the model, deploy it as an API, and then what you can do with that data, you can see listed here in terms of creating intelligent robotic process automation. I've got an example of that in the healthcare space where I talked to a CHRO recently who discussed credentialing of physicians, right, in the hiring process, validating their license, their education, those types of things. And she described it as soul-crushing work. And she said we were able to create a number of RPA capabilities that allowed that function to be done by the technology, and that freed up those resources that were previously dedicated. It ended up being a one full-time employee that could then be moved into another part of the business where they could actually add more human value and having more of that conversational type of experience with people versus the transactional one. And that's where I think you mentioned, the millennials wanting to be able to access information at 3 in the morning. We'll try not to make too many generalizations about the generations, but there's some truth to that. And at the same time, the boomers, right, are like, but I want a person to talk to. Right. So the question becomes, do you need a person to talk to validate your benefit deductible on that plan? No, you don't. But you do need a person to talk to when you say, hey, I'm thinking about the retirement process and I kind of want to slowly move out of the workforce. Are there opportunities for part-time roles in the business? You can't do that with a chatbot.
I think you hit a key there in that you need to have channels for everyone, right? Depending on where they are. Unless your workforce is all millennial or your workforce is somehow not diverse, right? Then maybe you don't, but that's not the case in most industries, right? So you need all these different channels just to have an HR service center and say, well, I finally consolidated my HR function. Now we have a service center and a 1-800 number. That's not enough anymore, right? That's 10 years ago. And my only other real comment is everybody wanted data, right? 10 years ago it was all about data warehouses and data lakes and data. Okay, well now you got the data. Now I challenge you, what are you going to do with it, right? That's the pivot point right here that we're on, the inflection, is you got data. What you do with it is going to be the difference of whether your company is around 10 years from now or not, right? It's the companies that are really understanding their employees, understanding the data, those are the companies that are going to really thrive.
I agree. And again, the key is what do you do with that data? And I don't care what industry you're in, I would argue that your people are your only appreciating asset in the organization. And so if you don't use data around your people to make better decisions for and about those folks, then you're going to be left behind. And so again, just some examples of how we're doing this today relative to Coleman, right? That's our artificial intelligence platform where we're able to use Coleman to actually have kind of that chat type of experience where you can interact with the system. Don't have time to get into a lot of detail there, but you mentioned it's kind of a spectrum, right? And so it starts with, okay, let's begin by giving people access to information. I know that I talked to one client that was excited that their employees could actually change their address on their mobile device. Okay, great. So that gives them a different interaction with the organization. Workflow automation, right, to be able to say, okay, when you submit this promotion request, it fits in the parameters of what we're asking for. So let's just automatically go ahead and allow that versus
Right.
sending that to somebody for approval. We talk about chatbots, which I think we all experience in our personal lives and may not even know it. And then the robotic process automation that we mentioned as well. And there will be, I think, a time where we start to see a little bit more in the form of outsourcing,
Yep.
right? You know, payroll, benefits, even recruiting you're starting to see more of, correct?
Yeah, my challenge here really is, take each one of these, take one of all your HR functions, and it's hard to say, oh, we totally value our employees, we totally, and then to not offer them accessibility, right? Or to not offer them a consumer type of experience, right? They all shop on Amazon, they all go to Walmart. Believe it or not, that's the experience that they're starting to expect from their employers, and that's from the point of recruitment, right? That when they have a recruiting experience, if you're sending them paper forms and having them, we're going to send you something, we need you to fax, that old word fax stuff in, you're in a bad spot, right? And you need to reach out, dial a friend, and get a strategy in place and get moving on this continuum. We've had customers that have taken their HR service center, which is consolidated, and they claim victory, but then looked at some of this technology, and they were able to reduce their workforce in their HR service center by up to 50% through automation, right? Taking everything that comes in and really looking at it going, wow, this is all rules-based. This is, to your point, right? If this comes in and it's within these parameters, we know what needs to be done. I don't need a person to do that, right? I can have RPA do that and just move it along and enter it into Lawson, and so much as send an email, cut a check, right? Those are, again, we don't have time to go into what RPA is, but it has those capabilities. And then chatbots are an easy win. Everybody has a chatbot. So it's exciting that these are now being built into the Coleman product, where you can deliver them straight out of your ERP product.
That's right. So you mentioned something just now, though, about when you take advantage of these types of opportunities, there's frequently a reduction in the amount of time that the HR people are spending on them. And so I want to be clear that the majority of the time, we're not seeing clients then let people go.
Yeah.
Okay, they're redistributing those people. I talked to one client who literally took a full-time employee that was freed up by taking advantage of these types of automation opportunities, and they had a ton of folks that were out on leaves, and they had a really hard time interacting with those individuals. They would have trouble with the communication, and so they made that person's sole reason for existence to interact with employees that were on leave. And they had one person actually say afterwards, your proactive reaching out to me may have saved my life, because I was having some significant issues related to depression and other things, which was part of the reason they were on leave. And I needed that human interaction. And so again, that's a prime example of how technology is actually allowing us to be more human at work.
Perfect. Yep. Totally agree.
So the impact here, again, and how all of this works, I would argue I've simplified it to the most valuable commodity on the planet, time, right? And if we have more time to have these personal interactions versus submitting, more data entry elements and responding to requests that are transactional and administrative in nature, then we're just not spending our time wisely.
Yeah. It really goes into factoring the ROI for this. And I know when you're on the client side, which I was, you get these ROIs that come back and they're like, we could save you $20 million. And you're like, there's no way, that's just crazy, blah, 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 right? And you go, oh, that's just the vendors fluffing the ROI on this. And it really isn't fluffed, right? So the example I want to give is you just take one piece of an HR process, right? And I don't care which process it is, right? Because we have hundreds within the HR continuum. But you just take one of them and say we can save 5 minutes a day by taking that out of a human's hand, giving it to automation. And say that person does that 10 times a day, right? Maybe it's a hiring process or a leave process. Certain industries have a lot of people on leave. And then they do that 5 days a week times 26 weeks. Okay, just the basic equation of that gets you up to 6,500 minutes that you just saved in one little piece that you took out. And if that employee was making $60,000 a year, that equates to 48 cents a minute. 6,500 times 48 cents a minute is $3,120. I didn't do that in my head. I wish I could, but it's on the screen there for me. I know, right? No math whiz kid here. So $3,120 annualized. and then it's a recurring savings, right? So you don't have to ever do that again. So say you're running your ROI over 5 years, right? That's $15,000, and that was one little 5-minute snippet that we just took out. Multiply that times all the processes in HR. Multiply that times finance, times supply chain, times your other areas of your business, and it gets into tens of millions of dollars in ROI very, very quickly. And then to your point, Marcus, you take that HR labor and you make a difference with it, right? You do something transformational for your employees or for your customers. It kind of touches me.
Absolutely. Well, you take those fantastical numbers that you mentioned around the ROI, the legitimate savings, and people frequently respond by saying that can't be true.
Right.
But so if you break it down, so you reduce it to the ridiculous, the smallest components, and you can see how it adds up. So we've automated more and more. Now it's time to aggregate the information and the data. You mentioned earlier, we've got access to more data than we've ever had in the past, but what do we do with it, right? And so that's where aggregation becomes really important. And so again, I would ask you to answer this question: how effectively does your organization use data to make decisions both for and about your people? And again, I think this is a fun time to be alive.
Absolutely.
And a fun time to be in the world of HR because it's changing so dramatically. We have access to so much information. In some cases, I think it's almost information overload.
Yeah.
How do we ensure that we understand what the data is telling us and then use it effectively? And so I want to give you some tangible examples of how we actually do that through some tools and technology that Infor has created. The first being continuous performance engagement. So I think one thing that virtually all of humanity agrees on is that annual performance reviews are awful. Nobody likes them. Nobody likes the experience. Nobody feels like they're very valuable. And so we're seeing this move to a lightweight, more frequent, less formal interaction model at work, right?
Yeah.
Where we allow individuals to check in between a manager and an employee, and even use things like questions of the week, where you can pull out your phone and say, hey, let me answer this question. It took me 2 seconds and I put it away.
My challenge really is, right, you can't say, I love to call people on things. We really care about our employees. How often do you talk to them?
Yeah.
Well, we send an annual performance survey.
Or every
once
2
a
years.
year. Once a year you care about them. You're going to take that and you're going to drive all the next year off of what you learned at that one point in time. I challenge you that you're not doing justice to the engagement. Employees really want a conversational experience, right? When you converse with people, they become your friends, right? You get to know them, they become closer to you. Think of your friends and your family that you talk to. You have a different relationship with them than, the HR person at work perhaps that you don't converse with, right? That's a cold and sterile engagement. But if you as a company are interacting continuously with your employees, that relationship changes. If you become engaged, right? So engagement is a huge word that we use in HR. How do we get engaged employees? Talk to them more than once a year. Let's start there.
Yeah.
The second thing that they always talk about is retention, right? If I have a relationship with you, I tend to not want to leave you, right? I'm bonded, I'm engaged, I'm committed. So talk to them more than once a year, right? And now you have tools to do it. So now the excuses are kind of gone, other than the budget thing, which we can help you through. But you have tools now to be able to change the behavior in the discussion.
That's right. And again, those tools can be things like really quick, short interactions like pulse surveys. You mentioned earlier that the expectations of your experience at work now have changed, again, for that next generation.
Right.
They want to work the same way that they live. And that means pull out their phone, short, quick, intuitive interaction, and put it away. So pulse surveys, the rave capability, right? Where that's something that's tied to performance management, where I can pull out my phone and say, Michael, fantastic job on the webinar today.
Yeah.
Really appreciate all your insight and perspective. It goes to you, it goes to your manager, and then it goes into your file for conversations later on, where again, we can use all of these different models of communication. Lightweight interactions, I think, are critical. And you talked about the result of this is the relationship opportunity. It's funny, I worked for a consulting firm here in Kansas City, and there was a managing director who wanted to get to the next level, and he was fantastic in his relationships with clients,
Right.
and he managed to the budget, and he always delivered, but his employees didn't love him.
Yeah.
And so I had to tell him, look, you need to start cultivating genuine, authentic relationships with your people. Have a conversation with them when you get to the office. And it was funny, I watched him try to do it, and he would come in and he'd be like, hey, Michael, how was your weekend? Oh, really? And I'm like, no. So again, there's still, even with the technology, there's still the human element that we have to make sure that we're giving people tools and resources
Absolutely.
to understand how to cultivate those relationships.
And there's a lot of science going on around this right now. Historically, we say this is work, this is personal. I challenge you that that's nonsense, right? That right now we're blending those two. So sending them a question doesn't have to be a pulse survey about work. It could be, who saw the latest Star Wars movie this weekend? They're going to be like, how cool, my employer knows me, Star Wars, blah, right? Again, you're creating a conversation. Don't make the conversation 100% about work, right? Engage with them, know something about them, right? Again, we have the data to know things about them. I challenge you to know a little bit about them kind of personally to get that human touch. I use a tool, a CRM tool, that I track, some things about, maybe I met Marcus. Okay, Marcus, he lives in Kansas City, right? I'm going to put certain things in there so that I can interact with Marcus and remember certain things. So I'm not like, oh yeah, I saw you like a year, like whatever, right? Change those relationships. Use the tools that you now have, and let's transform how we deal with our employees.
I agree. So again, you combine all of this. What's the impact? And once again, I think it comes back to the most valuable commodity on the planet. It's time. And you just mentioned how historically people talk about work-life balance. Let's keep these things separate. And I would argue it's time for work-life integration, right? And let's acknowledge that the relationships that we cultivate with people at work, they're personal, right? And certain industries have even more of that, like healthcare. I know you have a lot of experience there. The whole delivery of healthcare is extremely personal.
Absolutely.
And so let's not act like it's not, and say, hey, it's not personal, it's business. Right? That's just not accurate anymore.
Yeah. So many times we say, if we only knew. I challenge you to collect data that allows you to know, right? And then you used the word previously, prescriptive, right? Be aware and be doing things, right? Take action early. It could just be, right, not to bring up the morbid topic of, workplace violence or workplace suicide. But the more you have a pulse on your employees through these tools and through data, right, the more involved you can be, right? The more reaching out, being proactive you can be. And so I challenge you to leverage all the tools and leverage all the data and change how you're operating.
Yeah, you know what, that's legit and it's real. I'll give you another example. Back in my HR days, I had a manager come to me and say, this employee has been constantly late the last 2 weeks. And I've talked to him and I'm sick of it and I want you to address it. And so I said, okay, so I called the employee and he had made the assumption that this employee was simply being lazy or what his assumptions were, I'm not sure. I talked to the employee and the employee said, well, the company just changed my benefit plan and I have a special needs child that was going to a specific school in the morning, and now that school is no longer part of the network. I have to drive 30 minutes farther across town to drop them off. They won't let me drop them off any earlier than this time, so that makes me late every day. Well, if the manager had just taken the time to have the conversation and not assume the negative that they're just being lazy or they were out late, they would have known that.
Yeah, if something's happening with your employees, there's generally a reason, and as a leader, I have a whole series on leadership. You owe it to yourself and to that person who you're the leader on to engage and find that information out.
It just takes a short conversation. So we've automated a lot of these administrative transactional functions. We've aggregated the data. Now let's take some time digging into this, right? And again, just as an example, how it could be used when you're comparing and contrasting two people in the organization. And you can see the person on the right here actually works a lot more overtime than on the left, and they've been in their role for a very long time. Their compensation's about the same, their performance is about the same. One's got a little bit of a longer commute into the office. But these data points can give us insight when aggregated, and we can start to identify who in the organization is a heightened flight risk. Again, this is a tool that our clients use to get out ahead of, to proactively identify people who may be at risk for leaving the organization. And to your point earlier, it's not just a, hey, this person's at risk, good luck with that. The tool actually provides some recommended intervention. So it can say, look, I've seen you haven't taken any time off in 18 months. That's an easy one. Take some time off. Or maybe, hey, you've been in the role for 6 years, and it's probably time for something new, right? So how do we use data to find a new role in the organization that you're going to be a good fit?
Yeah. I love it. The talent science product, I'll give the shameless plug there. It is so under-adopted and underutilized, I feel. But people will come to us and they'll go, how can we take advantage of this data? And I'm like, talent science. How can we make a difference in retention? Talent science. How can we make sure people are in the right job? The example that I love is an RN, right, which is so critically short-staffed across the nation, right? Every hospital could use more great RNs. So you have an RN maybe that applies to night shift ER, and through talent science, we kind of do this personality profile, and we realize
yeah, we've got actually an example of that here.
Awesome, perfect. And we realize maybe she's not such a great fit for the ER, but man, she has a ton of ICU experience. We've got an ICU, overnight shift opening. Who doesn't, right, in healthcare? And she'd perform way better. Not, I need to staff, right? Notice what I said. I didn't say I need to staff that position. I said she would do better, right? Talent science will tell you where she will be a key performer for you and be a star player. It isn't always about you staffing positions. It's about finding that symbiotic relationship where the employee is going to be a long-term, highly engaged, successful employee that you're not going to have to recruit a new RN in 3 months because she gets burned out, she's in the wrong position, and she leaves, at a cost of $59,048, by the way. Times how many nursing positions do you have that turn over? Do that math, and that justifies the ROI for a tool like this.
That's right, that's right. So again, this is kind of the tangible way that it comes together. So you can look at Eliza here to see, is she a good fit for a sales executive role? The answer was a definitive no, right? But we can compare her with another profile on the operations side and see, actually, she's a decent fit there. And you can see there's a little bit less of a disconnect between the sweet spot and her capabilities and these behavioral characteristics. And then you can do one more comparison and say, okay, what if we compared her to a client results executive? This is the spot, right, where she is going to have the most success, the most natural fit into the qualifications needed for this role. And so, again, this is about using data to make decisions, not intuition, which we've historically been overly reliant on, correct?
The other interesting thing, you just got me flowing on this. People come to us and they say, we want to create a difference, right? We want to be we need something that's a differentiator for us to attract the best employees. This is a differentiator, right? Go back to Eliza and say, hey, thanks for applying. Through our process, look here, let's sit down together and talk about the data and talk about, she's going to go, oh my gosh, like I don't even work there, and this employer knows me, understands me, and is making sure I'm successful. There's your differentiator, right? That right there is your differentiator, and it didn't cost you, $1 bazillion, right? You're not whining and dining every candidate and such. That's a point differentiator. This is a career differentiator.
That's right. And again, we're moving away from that. Let's treat everybody consistently and in a standardized format to say, hey, one size doesn't fit all anymore. We need to personalize people's experience at work. And that starts with your very first impression in the interviewing process, asking them specific questions that are unique to them based on the data, giving them that personalized onboarding and orientation, creating succession and development plans that are unique to them, not saying to them, okay, you are in this role, and so my assumption is that other people in that role have historically moved into this, next role here, but you're unique, and so you moving into an account executive role may not actually be a great fit for you. In fact, the best role for you might be moving into a business development role, and the role from there is moving into a VP of operations role. So we've moved away from the ladder, the career ladder,
Right.
to a lattice.
Yeah, the standardization is dead, applies across so many different things, right? Even from I know we're talking about a human here, but take like standardization of laptops, right? That IT always touts, so you gotta standardize. You get one laptop for everybody, it'll absolutely meet their needs, but it doesn't, right? It falls short for so many reasons for so many people. So it's the same thing. Take that simple example and bring it into a human scale, right? If you're like, oh, we got to standardize our orientation. Do you? Right? Do you? Do you really need to standardize it? You need to have certain core, right, elements that everyone goes through, but understand who you're orienting, right? And I know that's hard, and you're like, but I don't know anything about them. But you could, right? You could know something about them from day one, and what a transformational experience that is for that employee. And let me tell you, while you're going, we don't need to do that. That's just, kind of pie in the sky stuff. Your competitors are doing it, right? Google's doing it, IBM's doing it. If you're ever connected to IBM and you want to understand how they're using tools like this, you look at what they do with their onboarding and engagement and how they manage their employees through their career cycle. They're doing this, right? It's being done. It's not pie in the sky. It's absolutely being deployed. It's the differentiator. It's what's going to make companies successful.
That's what I think a lot of people don't recognize. This isn't science fiction.
Right.
This is happening right now. In fact, if you want to try it, simply scan this QR code and you should be able to go take the assessment. You'll get some insights about yourself. And of course, we're happy to talk to you in a little bit more detail about it as well. So starting to wrap things up here around how does this all work together to create a more human experience in the workplace. I like to use, again, reference to our personal lives where I can go out to Nike and I can actually build my own shoe. I don't want this swoop, I want that swoop, I want it to be green and not orange, I don't want that air thing on the back piece. So how do we personalize our experiences, and how do we, again, use data to understand people where we can identify where there's an opportunity to address a problem or an issue. We can identify correlations between behaviors and outcomes and start creating objective predictors for performance. And then I love what you said earlier. We need to use conversations. We need to talk to people. Spreadsheets are lazy, right? We can't capture everything about somebody in a spreadsheet. And then what makes each individual unique and valuable, and how do we use that data to personalize their experience in the workplace?
Yeah, it's absolutely the differentiator in that manager-individual relationship right now. As you start moving into this space, your culture will adopt it, right? They will get very kind of into the fact that you're going to understand them, they're going to understand you, and through that understanding, right, you have relationships that are built versus kind of the sterile, well, that's my manager, right? That shouldn't be your manager, that should be Bill, and I should know about Bill, and right? And then you can understand, maybe Bill's having a bad day, and maybe when something doesn't go well, you understand why, and you can have empathy, right? And that's not driven by the data, that's driven by the relationships that some of this data allows you to create. So it gets a little complex, it does get a little woo-woo, but it's the most valuable thing that you can do to lead a workforce.
Yeah, and you mentioned the term empathy, and there's I think a study by Deloitte where they looked at what are the future skills that are going to make people valuable, and we hear a lot about STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, math. Those are great things, but we also need problem-solving skills, critical thinking, conversational and communication skills, empathy, and so those are important as well, and I think it's something we need to make a point of emphasis in the workplace. So again, wrapping all of this up, okay, another poll question, just to get you thinking, are you able to bring data about your people to the C-suite? to help make better decisions. So this is where we start to see the advisory capacity come into existence. And as we move away from reacting to issues and getting calls from managers, I've got a problem employee, how do we proactively address those things and get out advanced? So Pilot Flying J is one of our best examples of how we're bringing all of this together from a human capital and even a workforce management perspective where they can use their applications for scheduling and for the drivers. But this is the key right here. The idea is we can actually identify by the 5th day of the month what the revenue will be like in individual stores by just looking at the turnover data. And so again, what I'm saying there is that they can actually see turnover has increased in this individual store. We can anticipate an inverse relationship with turnover and revenue. And so we know by the 5th day of the month, that store is not going to have a good month.
Right.
So again, we're starting to then see, we need to think about the human element, right? The personal side of things and the impact it has on the financial side.
Yeah, and taking it, you're like, well, I don't own a gas station, right? Like, it's across every industry. We can't highlight that enough. For a healthcare example, in particular, I had one healthcare customer that, and they have about 20,000 nurses in their employ. Highly competitive with competing hospitals in the area. And they shared a stat with me, and I was surprised, like, everybody wasn't 100% focused on this, right? They said 1 out of every 3 of our new hire nurses leaves within the first 90 days. So think about that. You recruited them, there's a cost. You hired them, there's a cost. You onboarded them, there's a cost. And then they turned over. That cost is $59,000. 1 out of every 3, do the math, that equates to 6,000 times $59,000. That becomes a very large number that you could then invest in how do I prevent that from happening. The other example in healthcare is nursing turnover across the nation is at 17% times $59,000. In 2020, that's going to go to 20% for nurses, right, as they have nurse burnout. And let me tell you, doctor burnout is following right behind it, right, at a much higher cost, right, over $150,000 average cost of a physician turnover. So if you're not working to figure that out, and let me tell you, if it's not data driven and you don't have systems in place to back you up, to take numbers to your executive team and go, look, here's the real cost, here's the indicators, here's why it's happening. Running into the boardroom going, we have a high turnover cost, without data to back you up, that's not going to go so well, right? So you're going to have to very quickly get the systems in place to support your efforts to really change this. It's becoming a big problem, and we need different tools than we've had in the past.
We do, and I was talking to another healthcare client who identified that physician burnout was a major issue for them, and what they did is they created an HR concierge service just for physicians in their organization, using tools, right, using technology to change the experience of physicians, to proactively reach out, to identify when there was burnout and when there were issues. So they have literally a separate organization inside of HR now just dedicated to physicians. That's how important it is.
Absolutely need to think differently than we have in the past.
We do. So Bill, I don't know if we've gotten a ton of questions that we want to try to tackle here with the last 14 or 15 minutes here, but again, want to emphasize we do have an opportunity to remain quite human in our interactions with people despite the utilization of technology. Absolutely. And I certainly encourage us to do so.